They laughed at you, not because you were wrong, but because they couldn't see what was protecting you. They whispered your name, questioned your strength, and mocked your silence, fully believing you were exposed. What they didn't realize is that some of the strongest protection never shows itself until it's already done its work. If you've ever felt targeted for staying calm, judged for not reacting, or underestimated because you chose discipline over drama, this message is not random. It's finding you now for a reason. There comes a moment when mockery turns into consequence. A moment when people cross a line they can't uncross. And once that moment passes, there is no warning, no announcement, only outcomes. What's unfolding right now is not revenge, it's alignment. And if you're watching this, it means you were never meant to fight back. You were meant to outgrow. Stay with me till the end, because this message will explain why their influence is already ending, and why your path is about to become clear in a way it never has before. If this message resonates, comment, "I stayed silent," and watch what unfolds next. They mocked you because they thought you were weak. They laughed because they believed you were unguarded. They whispered because they assumed nothing stood behind you. No force, no shield, no quiet power watching over your steps. In their eyes, protection had to look loud to be real. It had to announce itself, threaten, dominate, and intimidate. Because you did none of those things, they assumed you had nothing. What they never understood is this: the strongest protection is invisible to those driven by hate. Hate blinds people. It narrows their vision until all they can see is surface-level behavior. They look at your silence and assume defeat. They watch your restraint and think you lack strength. They observe your patience and mistake it for fear. They never stop to consider that restraint can be a choice, and silence can be a strategy. You were protected long before they decided to target you, long before their opinions formed, long before their jealousy sharpened into intent. While they were watching you from the outside, measuring you by appearances, something deeper was already moving in your favor. Energy, timing, and alignment were quietly rearranging themselves around your life, placing you where you needed to be and removing you from what could harm you. While they mocked your calm, your discipline, your refusal to react, a barrier was forming that didn't need to be seen to be effective. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't make noise. It didn't warn them to stay away. And that's exactly why it worked. Real protection doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need validation. It simply does its job. People who operate from jealousy always misunderstand this. They believe power must be aggressive. They think strength must be forceful. They assume protection means control. But real protection waits. It observes. It allows people to reveal themselves fully before consequences take shape. They mistook your calm for weakness. They mistook your kindness for naivety. They mistook your patience for fear. And because of those assumptions, they grew bolder. They spoke when they should have stayed silent. They acted when they should have paused. They crossed boundaries they believed didn't exist. That was their mistake. What protected you was never designed to impress them. It was never meant to be explained, defended, or proven. It existed for one purpose only: your survival and your growth. And the moment they chose to mock it, they stepped into a space where they no longer had control. Now, the moment has shifted. The balance has changed. What once looked like nothing is about to reveal its effect. Not through noise, not through confrontation, but through outcomes they never saw coming. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Hate always clouds judgment before it destroys destiny. It doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in quietly, convincing people that their emotions are justified, that their resentment is righteous, that their actions are harmless. By the time they realize what hate has done to their thinking, the damage is already in motion. They weren't ignorant, they weren't unaware, and they weren't acting blindly in the beginning. They were warned, internally, subtly, repeatedly. Small moments of hesitation passed through them. Brief waves of discomfort followed the words they spoke against you. They felt resistance when they tried to interfere with your path, a strange sense that something wasn't aligning the way they expected. Those were warning signs. But hate is addictive. Once it takes hold, it demands to be fed. Instead of stopping when their intuition whispered caution, they chose escalation. Instead of reflecting on why your presence bothered them so deeply, they leaned further into resentment. Each decision to continue made the next one easier until restraint disappeared completely. They mocked what protected you because it unsettled them. Your peace highlighted their chaos. Your resilience exposed their fragility. Your ability to keep moving forward without needing validation reminded them of how stuck they felt in their own lives. And rather than confront that discomfort, they projected it outward. They mocked your faith because it reminded them of what they had lost. They mocked your boundaries because they had none. They mocked your discipline because it reflected their lack of control. They mocked your silence because they feared what it meant. What they didn't realize was that every act of mockery was being recorded, not by people, not by gossip, not by public opinion, but by consequence. Life has a way of keeping track when intention turns toxic. Every choice leaves a mark. Every step taken in hate shifts the direction of one's path. When someone acts out of pure hate, they stop listening to intuition. They ignore red flags. They silence the inner voice that says, "Don't go further." That voice doesn't disappear. It simply steps aside and lets reality take over. That's when fate steps in. Not dramatically, not immediately, but decisively. Events begin to line up in ways they can't control. Opportunities stall, relationships strain, momentum fades, confusion replaces confidence. They feel blocked without understanding why. They thought they were getting away with it. They believed silence meant permission and patience meant weakness. In truth, every step they took was locking them into an outcome they can no longer escape, one shaped entirely by the choices they made when they ignored the warnings. There is always a final moment, a moment so subtle that most people don't recognize it until long after it has passed. A moment where mockery stops being casual and becomes a decision. A moment where intention hardens and quietly turns into destiny. For them, that moment has already happened. From the outside, it may have looked insignificant. A careless comment, a calculated lie, a betrayal wrapped in justification. A deliberate move meant to undermine you while maintaining plausible deniability. But energetically, it was massive. It carried weight. It marked a shift that could not be reversed. That was the instant when protection turned into containment. Until then, life had been offering them chances to stop, opportunities to pull back, moments to reconsider. But once they crossed that line, the dynamic changed. What once simply shielded you now began to restrict them, not forcefully, not visibly, but effectively. From that point forward, things started to unravel in quiet ways. Plans that once seemed solid began to stall without explanation. Opportunities that appeared guaranteed suddenly dissolved. Support systems weakened, not through conflict, but through absence. Confidence once loud and certain, softened into anxiety, control. Something they believed they had mastered slipped through their fingers. They won't connect it to you. They won't admit the cause. They will blame timing, circumstances, bad luck, or other people. They'll search for external explanations because looking inward would require accountability. But deep down, they know something shifted, something changed, and they can feel it. Because protection doesn't just shield, it reflects. What they sent toward you never reached its target. The intention, the malice, the calculated energy all bounce back, not as punishment, but as alignment. Reality doesn't seek revenge, it seeks balance. And when someone pushes too far, balance responds. You didn't need revenge. You didn't need to respond. You didn't need to defend your name or expose their actions. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was trust. Trust in the protection that had already been placed around you long before they revealed themselves. The moment they chose hate over restraint, the outcome was decided. You stepped forward without resistance. They stepped into limitation without realizing it. You continued growing while they began managing consequences they never anticipated. And now, the door they walked through has closed behind them. There is no turning back, no rewriting the choice, no undoing the moment when mockery became destiny. You didn't shut that door. They did. Simply by crossing a line, they were warned not to cross. This is important for you to understand. Your role was never to defend yourself publicly. You were never meant to explain, justify, or prove anything to people who had already decided not to understand you. Engaging would have pulled you into their frequency, a space where emotion replaces clarity and reaction replaces intention. That level was never meant to hold you. You were meant to stay steady, to remain disciplined when others became reckless, to keep moving forward without narrating your journey or seeking validation. Silence, in your case, was not avoidance. It was alignment. It allowed the protection around you to function without interference. Because the protection surrounding you works best when you don't disrupt it with ego or impulse. Every time you chose silence over reaction, the shield strengthened. Every moment you resisted the urge to correct lies or respond to disrespect, that protection became more defined. Every time you chose integrity over pride, it solidified into something unshakable. And every time you chose growth over bitterness, it evolved into a force they could no longer reach. They mistook your lack of retaliation as victory. They assumed your calm meant surrender. They believed that because you didn't fight back, they had control of the narrative. But real victory doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't seek approval. Real victory waits. It waits while others expose themselves. It waits while consequences quietly form. It waits while truth rises without being pushed. Now you're watching the effects unfold without lifting a finger. Not because you wished harm, but because harm collapses naturally when it encounters truth. You didn't create their downfall. You simply refused to participate in their chaos. And without your energy to feed off, their actions lost momentum. Your life continues to expand. Your awareness sharpens. Your clarity increases. Decisions become easier. Paths open that once felt blocked. What once felt heavy begins to feel distant. Your direction becomes cleaner, simpler, more aligned with who you are becoming. Meanwhile, they feel trapped in repeating cycles, same patterns, same frustrations, same emotional loops they can't seem to break. They're not being punished. They're being shown themselves, and that is often the hardest consequence to face. This is why you were protected, not to dominate them, not to win arguments, not to prove superiority. You were protected so you could outgrow them without damage, without bitterness, without carrying weight that was never yours to hold. And once you outgrow someone, their influence ends forever. They no longer have access to your energy, your attention, or your future. You move on. They remain where they are. And that separation is the final confirmation that you were never meant to fight back, only to rise beyond reach. This is the final message, and the most important one. Everything before this led here. Not to drama, not to confrontation, but to clarity. Their fate isn't sealed because you are powerful. It's sealed because they chose hate instead of growth. Power didn't defeat them. Their own decisions did. They mocked what protected you because they believed consequences only existed when they were visible. If they couldn't see an immediate reaction, they assumed there would be no cost. If there was no public response, they thought they were safe. But consequences don't need belief to function. They don't require acknowledgement. They operate whether someone accepts them or not. What's happening now is alignment correcting imbalance. Life has a way of restoring order when things drift too far out of place. You are being moved forward, quietly, steadily, deliberately. Doors are opening without force. Obstacles are dissolving without struggle. You're stepping into spaces that match who you've become, not who you had to be to survive. At the same time, they are being slowed, not attacked, not exposed, slowed. Progress feels heavy. Momentum disappears. They are being forced into stillness, into reflection, into facing parts of themselves they avoided for too long. This doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen on your schedule or theirs, but it happens inevitably. And here's the key you must understand. You are no longer part of their story. Whatever lesson they are facing now has nothing to do with you anymore. You played your role by choosing restraint when reaction was tempting, growth when bitterness was easier, and silence when noise would have felt satisfying. Your protection has already done its job. It shielded you when you needed safety. It reflected what didn't belong to you. And now it's redirecting your energy toward expansion, not defense, toward creation, not correction, toward the future, not the past. You don't need closure. Closure comes from understanding, not conversation. You don't need apologies. Growth does not require permission. You don't need validation. Your path is evidence enough. Because the moment they mocked what protected you, they made a decision they didn't realize they were making. They forfeited access to your time, access to your energy, access to the version of you that is moving forward now. They can't follow you where you're going. They can't interfere anymore, and they can't undo the choice that placed them outside your future. And now, it's too late. As this message comes to an end, there's something important you need to understand. What you've just heard isn't meant to create fear, anger, or pride. It's meant to bring clarity. The chapter you've been living in is closing, whether anyone else notices it or not. And closure doesn't always come with explanations or apologies. Sometimes it comes with peace. You didn't lose anything by staying silent. You didn't fall behind by choosing restraint. You didn't miss out by refusing to defend yourself to people who never intended to listen. What you did was protect your future. And now, that future is beginning to separate itself from the past. If you look closely, you'll notice it already happening. You think differently. You respond differently. Situations that once triggered you no longer have the same power. That's not coincidence. That's growth. That's alignment pulling you forward while quietly removing what no longer belongs. The people who mocked you, doubted you, or underestimated you will continue on their own path. You don't need to monitor it. You don't need updates. You don't need to understand how or when their lessons arrive. That part is no longer your responsibility. Your responsibility now is to keep moving with clarity, discipline, and trust in the process that has carried you this far. Remember this: protection doesn't always feel like safety in the moment. Sometimes it feels like isolation. Sometimes it feels like being misunderstood. Sometimes it feels like being alone, while others seem loud and confident. But real protection reveals itself in the long term, through outcomes, not arguments. You are not here to prove anything. You are here to become something. And becoming requires letting go of who and what can't follow you forward. So take this moment as confirmation. Confirmation that your silence mattered, that your patience was not wasted, that your restraint was noticed by forces far beyond public opinion, and most importantly, confirmation that you are free to move forward now without looking back. The past has done its job. The lesson is complete. The path ahead is clear.